Hey guys, Ryan over at Maverick Metalworks. Today I'm working on a pretty simple project. We have a Jeep Wrangler JL behind me. It's a Rubicon edition. It's sitting on 40s. The 40s are mounted to a Icon Beadlock wheel. Now, these Icon beadlocks are pretty cool. They're not like a traditional beadlock where you would see a ring that mounts around. Normally that ring would bolt in place, which sandwiches or squishes the bead of the tire and locks it into place. Great for off-road conditions where you're going down to 4 psi, even down to 0 psi. It'll keep that tire in place, make sure it doesn't fall off, make sure you don't get anything inside the bead. Where its downfall is they're not super safe on the road, mostly for maintenance. If you really keep up with it, it'd probably be okay, and people do it all the time. But if you don't, and I've seen this happen before, the bolts back out, ring comes off, and that whole tire is only held in by that ring. So if the ring falls off, it just becomes a safety precaution. So not DOT approved, use normal beadlocks on the road. These, however, because of their design, they are DOT approved, which is #1 selling point to me. There's other options. I personally like Coyote beadlocks. That's what I run on my own rig, and that's more of an airbag inside, but we'll get to that in a different video. If you haven't looked into them, look up Coyote beadlocks. This is a great alternative. It uses the standard mounting system that a normal wheel would. You mount it just like you would a normal tire onto a normal wheel. But where it adds its beadlock feature is it has these bolts all the way around the inside of the wheel. So not the outside perimeter, but just on the inside. And what that'll do is you've got your wheel, and then you have your tire, and then the bolt comes up in this direction. And that is going to basically compress and hold everything in place. It's not quite as good as a standard beadlock, but they are really cool. They do work really well. What we are working on today is replacing some of the O-rings. Now, I've seen a whole lot of flack on the internet talking about how these O-rings are a bad design. I don't necessarily agree. I also don't 100% disagree, but I don't agree with that. I don't think it's necessarily a bad design. I've seen dozens of vehicles in here that have had these, and they've never complained or had any issues. Where we are having to replace them today is because they came off and came back on. And this Jeep came in for some other stuff. This one tire was losing air very slowly. We took everything apart and we looked at it, and it had a bunch of mud and some rocks inside the bead itself and the inside bead. So we ended up having to pop both beads out, clean them out, and that's just part of wheeling. It happens, especially if you don't have a beadlock ring on. So we cleaned those out, we put everything back together. But the reason these need to be replaced is an O-ring is kind of single use. Sometimes you can get away with doing them twice, but usually it's you squish it once, and then when you decompress, you need to replace it, and that's what's happening in this case. Most of the rings are actually okay. There's only 4 of them, and I've actually got them paint marked over here. Austin does, marking which ones are leaking, but there's a very slight amount of air that is leaking out of these if you spray it with soapy water. Now, this thing has been sitting for 2 weeks now since we changed out the tire, and we still have air in it. So it's a very slow leak, but the last thing I want is for him to go out on the trail and then all of a sudden the leak get worse and he continuously starts losing air. So we're gonna go ahead and replace them. Since all of them were loosened, we're gonna replace all of them on this tire. The other 3 tires are completely fine. We did check them, and we're gonna leave those alone. There's no reason to touch them because they haven't been loosened. But we're gonna go ahead and knock these out today, and that way he is completely confident when he goes out on the trail that he's not gonna start losing air. These are a 100 pack of O-rings. On the package it says 75 Viton V75, size 904, quantity of 100. I could have easily bought less, but for $20 I wanted to just give him a bag where he has them and he can change them out if he ever needs to. I'll put the part number for these on the video, but it is a McMaster Car item. So we had these the day after I ordered them. So without further ado, let's get started. The first step is going to be to let the air out of the tires. Before I do that, I'm going to put a depth gauge underneath it. That way the weight of the vehicle is not going to be sitting on top of that tire that doesn't have any air in it. Normally I have a tool that removes the valve stem. I've got one that removes the valve stem and kind of allows you to check pressure, one that allows you to just remove it all together. Both of those are in the Gladiator right now, which is at the house. So instead of sitting here for hours, minutes, taking out the air through the standard valve stem, I'm going to go ahead and pull out one of these beadlock bolts because those do head right into the air chamber. So I'll loosen it first with a ratchet and a socket. It is a 7/16 12-point socket. You can see there's actually a little bit of bubbles coming out from when we were checking it. But once it's loose, I'm then going to take my drill, and I'm only having it setting 10. It's an aluminum wheel and a steel bolt, so I want to make sure we definitely don't mar up the threads on these things. But I will take it out, and then we're going to have a large opening where air can escape. As that airs down, I am taking my bolts, cut the old O-ring off. I don't lose it. Put my new O-ring on. Please. I will start it by hand and move on to the next one. Pretty simple process. I'm going to go ahead and break all of them free by hand. And then I can switch over to my drill and do them one at a time. That way I don't lose track of which ones I've already done. I'm just going to go clockwise around, leaving them halfway in or partially in as I go. Figured I'd come and show you right there. You can see how it's just a little squished. It's not too bad, but it's enough that it's worth replacing. Just a little bit of effort for a whole lot of peace of mind. For this last one, I'll get you guys a little bit closer. I know sometimes when it's far away, it's hard to really understand what's going on. So I want to give you a close-up on at least one of the bolts and what the process looks like. If you look at this bolt, there is a flat machined ring on the outside, and that's where the O-ring sets. So once that drops in there, it fills in that flat machined portion, and then just drop it back in and give it a couple turns by hand. So now that we have all the O-rings in place, I'm going to go through and use my drill. Again, I have the setting on number 12. I don't want this to go in too far, and even then I'm only going to pull the trigger about halfway. I'm going to go ahead and drive these, not until they're tight, but until they're close. If I feel any resistance, I'm going to go ahead and stop. That's a little resistance on that one, so I'm going to come back out and try it one more time. And now we're going to bust out our torque wrench, and Icon recommends that we set this to 20 foot-pounds. everything torqued down, we're going to go ahead and put air back in the tire and check the soapy water. So when I put the jack stand underneath the vehicle, I knew that I didn't necessarily need to lift the vehicle up. Since I was letting the air out of the tire, it was going to drop down anyways, so I left it just a little bit below the axle. Did not need a jack to put it in. And then when I dropped it, the air pressure out, the axle slowly dropped down until it sat on top of it, and then it did its job. The cool thing about doing that is now that I'm adding air pressure back in, it'll also lift it back off of the jack stand, and again, won't need to jack the vehicle up. Just about there. Alright, we have some nice soapy water here. Alright. So we officially no longer have an air leak on our Icon Beadlock wheel. Next step is going to be to pull this thing out, rinse off all of our soapy water, and put the keys in the lockbox for the customer to pick up tomorrow. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. And stay tuned for more. Like, subscribe, you know, all that fun stuff. Next time.